Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
Mine right now.
Well, philanthropy plays a hugely important role in the recovery, in the immediate response and the recovery to wildfires across the country, and particularly here in the West. And so we're really delighted today to have a great panel of philanthropic organizations who have been working hard in their particular areas of the West to help generate that initial momentum to start both response and recovery. I'm going to dispense with me introducing each one of them individually because we're a little bit behind time. So I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves and their organization, and they each have some slides that they're going to go through. So I'm going to start with Megan Barber, Allende.
Okay, hi everybody. So as you can see, I'm the CEO of the Community Foundation of Mendocino County. I drove about an hour and a half to get here if you're not from California. So north of San Francisco by 2 hours. It's a county, I think, the size of Rhode Island and has about 90,000 people. So it gives you a sense. And my friend John Kennedy spoke a little bit about our fires previously. So the question, I think, are we starting with the question?
Well, go ahead and just jump into
We'll just jump into the question, which is sort of how have we responded following various wildfires. We have actually had one every year for the last 5, although maybe one was kind of more human started, but bottom line, every year we have had a fire since 2017. So part of my story for you is the very first one in 2017. We benefited because Sonoma County and Napa also got a fire that same night. Thank God for that, which is a surprise to hear me say. The reason is no one knows where Mendocino County is. If we had just lost our nearly 400, is 404, I think, is the official number of homes, I'm not too sure a whole lot of people would have showed up for us. Our community would have, but I don't think the greater world would have. We were lucky. People knew Napa, and somehow that helped us. So in that fire, we were, with our partners, able to raise about $4.5 million for individual assistance of all kinds. And so we were really careful with our money. So one thing I will tell you is everybody kind of wanted us to put it all out, like day one. But we had an instinct, despite not knowing what we were doing, quite honestly, that it was a long road and we should hold back dollars. So in the end, and we had a good partnership with a local business that also brought in, part of those dollars to kind of help people as they went. So first we did the individual assistance, the couple $1,000s, they could spend it however they wanted. And then we did a really measured process where we gave different grants for different needs throughout, in the end, about a 3-year recovery process. So just to understand what that ended up looking like, we did something called the critical needs grants. So for some people, that was getting a power pole so they could live in temporary housing on their homestead. For other people, it might have been tools to get back to work. So it really depended on the person, and they were like around $5,000. We have kept that theme through all of our fires. Feels like a really important part. We did some really great community recovery work, some things that I'm really proud of. We did things like yoga class for survivors, really cool art projects to commemorate some of the losses. We did have 8 people die that night, including 2 teenagers, which still is a very painful reality for our community. We did things of all natures just to kind of get people through that phase. Then we went into the rebuilding phase, which is really where most of our dollars ended up. But that is not in the first year. That's year 2 and year 3. And thankfully, we had the ability to work with some volunteer-run organizations. The Mennonites were some of our favorites, so blessed they came to town. We ended up rebuilding, with John's help, about 12 homes. And these are people that would have been homeless. That's just the bottom line. They would have been homeless. They had no insurance. They owned that land, but they really would never have been able to afford a home. We did large housing grants for those folks, and then touched a lot more people at about 121 homes that we helped touch in various ways. And John, I give a lot of credit for. He had a lot to do with that. We did really special things for seniors to get them respite. We made sure there were animal habitats, because we have 4-H where we are, and kids needed their chicken coops to go back to life of raising chickens. So we did things like that. And you know, as we got people rebuilt, the very last piece was these home stretch grants, which kind of gave them some furniture. Because it's great to have a house, but if you have nothing to put in that house, and donated items help, but you actually really need furniture. So that was our sort of final phase. Collectively, we felt a lot of, that we did good work. We had most people housed within 3 years. Now, I will tell you, that was not necessarily rehoused in something our county might have considered a home. And that was some of our learning. Our goal was to get them back in the kind of home they were in prior. So for some people, that was a yurt. Some people was an interesting collection of rooms on their properties, but we just decided that wasn't our job to decide what is a home. It's the, you know, the survivors. So we really tried to be flexible and support people however we could and in whatever way they needed us to. So, you know, that's sort of my big fire. As I said, what's the hardest piece, and the piece I wanted to speak to any funders in the room, is, you know, people showed up for us with that fire. I was able to raise nearly $1 million for infrastructure. So we had, you know, case managers, we had a project manager, like we had what we needed to do that work. Every fire since then, the private donors not showing up. We've gotten, like, you know, one grant from the League of California Community Foundations, but essentially all we've been able to do is that, you know, initial assistance and maybe some critical needs grants, and that's all these survivors have gotten. So my fire a year ago, just a little bit, 34 homes, a lot of them, you know, don't have the resources to rebuild, and they just might not get to. So I think that, as a friend from the rural area spoke to, we just aren't on the map. And so while 34 homes doesn't seem like a lot, it is an entire neighborhood where we are. So there's an entire neighborhood that does not exist anymore. So that is my most recent one. And I'll just tell you, thank God for rain. You took off my hypervigilance for 2 weeks, and I'm really happy today, because this is a very stressful time of year for us. There's a lot of collective trauma. Every day we get smoke, we get socked in. Everyone's getting triggered, including me and maybe John. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you. Gabriela, if you would give us an overview of the Latino Community Foundation.
Can you hear me? Okay, there we go. Yes. Good afternoon. My name is Gabriela Orantes. I am the Just Recovery Partnership Manager for the Latino Community Foundation's Just Recovery Initiative. I am housed at one of our partners. So my role is, you met my colleague Karim Sanchez yesterday. North Bay Organizing Project is one of our partnership's core partners. And this was a partnership that was developed after the 2017 wildfires here in Sonoma and Napa counties. 3 organizations, Latino-led organizations that responded during the fires were in deep relationship already with the Latino Community Foundation. And so on those first couple days, they received a phone call from our Vice President of Branding and Programming, Masha Cherniak, and she called the EDs up of La Luz, which is down the street from here, North Bay Organizing Project, and Up Valley Family Centers in Napa County. How are you? What do you need? And through that, it was, well, we need immediate assistance now in terms of cash funding. People are needing to relocate. We have families at the coast who didn't want to go to shelters. We're trying to help them get hotels, sleeping bags. We just need to get them resources. So LCF, with its platform, was able to fundraise over $1.4 million in a short amount of time, which was unprecedented for them at that time, 5 years ago. Weren't in the business of rapid response relief. That has changed in the last 5 years. However, in that moment, like my fellow panelists, that wanted to take a step back, not disperse all of it immediately, but ask those 3 core partners, what should we do? Should we look at long-term? And they co-developed a partnership, giving these organizations the agency to decide what to do with those funds. So in 2018, we launched the Just Recovery Partnership, made up of 10 organizations, grassroots Latino-led organizations, both in Napa and Sonoma counties. We have a wide spectrum of grassroots organizations, from arts to a radio station, first bilingual radio station in the nation, based out of Santa Rosa, family resource centers, an organizing engine, and indigenous cultural preservation organization. And we have been together for the past 4 years now, led by myself. I started as a fellow with them, and because we have had compounding crises and disasters since, we have seized the moment really to continue this partnership and act as a coalition, leverage each other's resources. Behind me, the pictures behind me are of our most recent disaster resiliency programming initiative that we started at one organization, Corazon Healdsburg, up in Healdsburg, and took their model and expanded it throughout our partnership so that it reached another county. And we have equipped folks with disaster preparedness, in-depth disaster preparedness training. Alma Bowen, who was also on yesterday's panel, has supported our promotoras, which are outreach experts based in community, the best community experts that you will find. And we have a network of 60 women who come from each of these 10 organizations. And this is all because the Latino Community Foundation trusts and invests in the ideas and the visions and the dreams that have come out of this partnership. Something that doesn't always happen, but LCF is very proud and excited of what has come out of this. Our model our first phase is relief, immediate relief, then it is recovery to strengthen the organizations as they continue through beyond the immediate disaster, and resilience is the third phase, where we build power and systems change, because really a just recovery is addressing root causes. It's not just the fire that rolled in, but what else, what other systemic challenges does that fire uncover? Most of us saw that with the pandemic as well. And so out on your tables, some of you received the green report. That's a report of our past 4 years together. We have recommendations for the field in there as well for our funder friends. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Gabriela. So, Tatiana. Hello. Oh.
We'll just switch. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Tatiana Hernandez. I'm the CEO of the Community Foundation Boulder County. I first and foremost just want to thank all of you for the last day and a half, or now 2 days. I think we're the newbies in the room to the club that nobody wanted to be a part of, but it is reassuring to be in good company with good partners. So a little bit of background on the Community Foundation. We've been Boulder County's trusted philanthropic partner for over 31 years. We manage a little over $93 million in assets, and annually over the last 10 years have given out just over $10 to $12 million in support to people in our community. Prior to the Marshall Fire, our Community Foundation was not unfamiliar with disaster. We'd held 6 different emergency funds in our 30-year history, 3 of them in the last 2 years. Again, this is prior to the Marshall Fire, so since 2020 it was COVID, fire, shooting, then Marshall Fire. So just to paint a little bit of a picture for you all of what the Marshall Fire was for our community, if you're not familiar. Boulder County of about 300,000 people, 200,000 of the population is split across 2 cities, the city of Boulder and the city of Longmont. And then the other 100,000 is across a number of different jurisdictions and unincorporated Boulder. We have mountain communities, we have front range communities, we have exurbs, suburbs, rural, there are cows. It actually looks a lot like here, which is nice because it feels like we're home. I did not understand the exercise in terms of the pictures. I'll be honest, we've been doing so much of the work that we haven't really had time to take pictures of the work. So this is actually just a couple of images from a few weeks after our fire where I met with fire survivors as they were sifting through their debris. So I wanted to paint Boulder County for you all. On December 30th, we woke up to a really dangerous situation in our community. In the morning, there were 3 grass fires to the north of the city of Boulder, one of which eventually did get named the Middle Fork Fire. So at 10:30 a.m., as we were sitting in our staff meeting, via Zoom, of course, one of our staff members was evacuated for the Middle Fork Fire. So we saw that happen in real time. We knew then we needed to be kind of on alert, right? Our hypervigilance kicked in. By noon, we understood there was a 4th now fire that was ignited off of Marshall Road. It's on the south side of our county, at which point the Office of Emergency Management set up quickly. We took to the police. I'm trying to remember, I can't think of the name of it right now. I'm looking at my first responders over there. We started listening to the police scanner, that's the word I was looking for. And I texted the head of the Office of Emergency Management, just like, hey, Mike, we're paying attention. Like, won't get in your way, but we're paying attention. So over the course of 3 hours, we listened to horrifying sounds of just first responders calling in addresses and fire, addresses and fire, addresses and fire. And then about 3 p.m., the operator came on and said, no fire calls, evac only, at which point my stomach dropped. And I texted Mike, hey, fund? And he's like, yes. So our fund was up and running by 4 p.m., at which point by 5 p.m. we knew that 1,100 homes had burned. We had over 35,000 people evacuated. There were 2 losses of life, which is incredibly tragic, but also miraculous considering the speed of our fire. We had fire moving at the rate of 120, 135 miles per hour across our county, which was just a lot. So that was the fire itself. That was day 1, right? Over the course of the next couple of days, so now we're talking December 30th, Thursday. By Saturday, January 1st, I think that would have been, we understood that the Disaster Assistance Center was going to be up and running on Monday, at which point we said, great, sent our board approved very quickly immediate direct financial assistance in the thousands for people who'd been directly affected. And so we were on site at the DAC by Tuesday writing checks for folks who'd been directly affected to the tune of like $2,500 or $5,000. I name that because it was just an unbelievable community effort. Like, we had our banks open on a Sunday for us to pre-print checks, right? Like, there really was this incredible surge of community support, not just financially, but in terms of the people who opened doors to make it possible for us to be able to support our community. And so I want to, there's so many folks I could thank right now, but Mike Chart at OEM is amazing. Sheriff Pelly and all of the first responders were unbelievably supportive. Our banks, our partnership with Boulder County. So when I say we were on site at the Disaster Assistance Center, our county's HHS department agreed to do intake for us and just give us, confirm this is a person was a fire survivor, so that we could write the checks and do a little bit of due diligence on that front end. And that would not have been possible without that public-private partnership. So to date, the foundation has raised over $40 million from approximately 77,000 people from around the world. I mean, we really oriented solar panels to capture the attention. I think we were really surprised in terms of we knew our community was going to show up. We knew our neighbors were going to show up, but when we were getting donations from across California, God bless you guys, and even Europe and China, we were just kind of like, whoa, what's going on right now? So similarly, so to date, sorry, am I over my 5 minutes, Jim?
No, you can
Okay.
go a little bit more.
Okay, so to date, we've given out $8.5 million in direct financial assistance. So our first grants were get money in people's hands as quickly as possible. And that included not just residents, but people who worked at businesses that were affected, because we understood, like, you may just be an employee of a business, not just. You may have been an employee of a business, and yes, you're eligible for unemployment, but that's gonna take a minute, and we don't want, like, secondary people getting kicked out of their apartments because they can't pay rent. Our next grant was to United Policyholders, right? We called Valerie right away, having worked with them at a previous fire, and said, okay, folks don't know what they don't know. We got to get you on the ground as soon as humanly possible. And thank you for doing that as soon as humanly possible. The next set of grants that we made were for mental health support. So we worked with our school district as well as, I'll mention that part. We worked with our school district very quickly to make sure that they had mental health support professionals in the most fire-affected schools within weeks of the fire happening. And then we had started a program with our local Jewish Family Services at the beginning of COVID around mental health support. So basically we created a fund. They worked with practitioners who would sign up for this program. People would come in if they needed mental health support, and JFS would pay the bill on their behalf, right? So it was intended to be supplementary to insurance, or if for folks who didn't have insurance, just making sure those mental health supports were there. So that was COVID. Then we added to it for the first fire. We added to it after the shooting. So we added to it again this time around. To date, we've given out over $750,000 for mental health supports. Thanks. There's quite a bit more. I mean, I think we can talk from recovery to rebuild, but maybe that's a second part of the conversation.
Yeah, let's
Okay.
move on, and we're going to come back, and we're going to have questions as well from the audience. Jake is here. Great. Okay, so Jake?
All right.
And not from State Farm.
All right. So as Jim said, my name is Jake Weir. I am Good 360's disaster recovery specialist. So if you're familiar with Good 360, you're probably surprised that this isn't Jim Alvey or Damian Morales up here. I'm our team's spreadsheet nerd. But this week, all three of us are traveling, so I drew the correct straw. But if you're not familiar with Good 360, we are a nonprofit. We've been around about 40 years. We have about 70 people. What we do is we're essentially a matchmaker for donations from companies to nonprofits. We work with a network of about 400 companies around the US and around the world, as well as about 10,000 nonprofits. And these nonprofits range in their missions from domestic violence, poverty, homelessness, literacy, pets, everything you can think of. And they're really just doing some incredible work. We were originally founded with the idea of all these companies having excess product, and in cases of excess inventory, outdated inventory, a lot of companies just throw it away. And that's horribly unsustainable considering there's so many people that could use those products, those donated goods. So we were just founded on the idea of moving that into the hands of people who can really use it. For about 5 or 6 years now, disaster recovery has been working under the idea of the right goods to the right people at the right time, which means that we're trying to be a little more targeted with where we are sending our donations. We work with nonprofits who work in long-term recovery specifically, but also as well as preparedness and response groups. And what it means with the right goods, the right people at the right time, is we don't want to overburden the communities. We don't want to send them things that they don't need just because we think it'll make us look better. We want to send them things that they truly need to be as effective as they can and help the people around them. So what that means to us is we try to avoid what's often referred to as the second disaster. When disaster strikes, and as Supervisor Ramos said this morning, people really do want to help and they'll send what they think people need, but sometimes it just has to be done in a more responsible and sustainable way. So we try to work with those on the ground. We're not a boots on the ground organization, so we talk to local and state emergency management agencies, nonprofits, the VOAD groups, and as well as anyone else who is affected by the disaster, just to really gauge what's going on and what we can do to help. Touching back on the second disaster is when your community is already overburdened with a flood, tornado, hurricane, wildfire, whatever happened, and you're trying to evacuate people, you're trying to remove debris, and truckloads of water or used clothing or more recently hand sanitizer and PPE just start showing up at town hall. And now you have to dedicate personnel, you have to dedicate resources to remove that. So we try to pair public outreach and say, hey, here's what to send, here's what not to send, but more importantly, make sure that you're talking to the people who are going to be receiving it, you're making sure that it's needed. We often refer to that as ground truthing, just making sure that what you're trying to do and how you're trying to help is actually needed, and it's very important that that's done correctly. In terms of our work in disaster, we specialize in long-term recovery, and I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with that. It's when the news vans pack up, the media isn't writing about it anymore, and when the public really forgets about what happened, but people still don't have their homes, their businesses are still gone, and making sure that we can get people back to a sense of normal. Our team has grown in the last year or so, from 2 to 4 people, not really huge there, but so we've tried to expand a little bit more to open our presence in preparedness and response. So that's kind of where we've begun to play a little bit into wildfires. Recently this year, we received funding from the CDP to expand our leased and donated warehouse space. So we're trying to increase our warehouse presence more in California to allow us to better respond to wildfires. In terms of long-term recovery, a lot of the same principles apply where people need a house, they need a roof, they need appliances, they need a bed, but the product needs in that first 72 hours, that first week, they are different for a wildfire as opposed to a flood. Recently, we activated about a month and a half ago in eastern Kentucky for the flood, and the need for mold remediation, everyone needed that. It's just, when water is pouring into your home, that's what you need in order to try to save it once you get all the water out. But obviously in a wildfire, that's not going to be the case. So I think that's the next step of, once we establish warehouse space, being able to pre-position the correct products that nonprofits will need when disaster does inevitably strike. So I think that's all for me.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Well, so what I'd like to do, so you've heard these great philanthropic organizations talk a little bit about what they're trying to do and how they mobilized quickly for both the relief and recovery of their communities. What I'd like to do is ask you to start thinking about, if you have a question of how does philanthropy mobilize, or what have you seen and what questions you would have of this group. And I have a whole, I can help them all day with questions here. But I'll start it off with a question to any one of them, and you all can then think of your question. So the next thing I'm going to do is come out into the audience, and somebody needs to raise their hand. So we heard earlier and throughout this conference, the state and federal government have these strategic plans and processes for how they respond both in the immediate disaster and then in recovery. How do you see philanthropy fitting into that? You, Tatiana, you just look like you're going to jump out of your seat. So I'm going to go ahead and call on you.
Finish the question.
Maybe you can finish the question.
I'm not sure I need to. I mean, so basically, how do you see philanthropy mobilizing? You're oftentimes the first organizations on the scene are these implementing organizations. They're of the community, and the first money into the scene is often private. It's not public. So what has been your experience? What's been successful? And how have you changed your approach from what you've learned through the fires, the disasters you've been dealing with?
Yeah. So I think take a step back and start with, like, philosophically, I've been in philanthropy for about 12 years with the nonprofit sector my entire career. And I think at its best, philanthropy is the R&D arm of government. We pilot, they scale. So I would start by saying I'm grateful for the fact that we live in a community where our local and state elected officials are very accessible. I mean, incredibly, incredibly accessible. And so as we were in response mode, they really did look to us as experts on what was happening on the ground and oriented their work to what we were trying to do to support survivors. So what I didn't get to talk about in my opening remarks, I mentioned we've raised over 40 million, we've given out a little under 10, but we've committed about 37 of it. And 20 million of that is a commitment to a rebuild fund. Very quickly, our state elected officials put a measure together and were able to allocate $20 million. We knew CDBG and CDBGDR would eventually, hopefully, eventually make their way to our community. But the number one thing I said to anyone who would listen to me was we cannot ask people to fill out 17 different applications. Like, we can't keep having this like cluster bomb on top of all of the trauma that's already existed. And so we approached, including case management. So in Colorado, we actually are at a deficit to all of you in California. We do not have a coordinated case management system in the state of Colorado. So week one, I'm screaming like, we need a centralized case management, we need centralized case management. And our nonprofits really didn't have the capacity to do that. So I approached our county commissioners and said, we've just had a shooting, and we know that in the criminal justice system, if you've been a victim of a violent crime, you get an advocate. Why is there not a similar function within disaster recovery for folks who've survived? So to their credit, the commissioner's like, that's very compelling. Like, we'll pay for it. Just, can you own it? And so we actually have recovery navigation as a core function of our county's disaster recovery plan. Through recovery navigation, and that's Katie, my partner in thriving. Through recovery navigation, any fire survivor can not only access the $20 million that we've allocated in rebuilding funds, but they can also access the $2.5 million that we've allocated for unmet need. They can also access the $20 million that the state put aside for rebuilding, and they can access CDBG and CDBGDR funds. So it's a one-stop shop to get access to the entire capital stack that's available for rebuilding and the resources above and beyond that financial support. It's imperfect. It's taking a little bit to scale, but I'm hopeful that on the other side of this, our residents will see that at the very least coordinating all of these efforts through one place meant that they weren't being re-traumatized by having to retell their story 5, 6, 7, 8 times.
Yeah. That is so hugely important, and we know that happens again and again in disasters, as people just keep getting re-traumatized by being forced to tell the same story over and over. I got to ask you another question, and then we're going to get to some of the questions from the audience and engage our other panelists. But given that the government recognized that you jumped into a role that they should have been playing, did they reimburse you?
No.
No, but they put money in. So the county put in $400,000 towards recovery navigation. We put in $1 million. The county's now putting a ballot measure in front of our voters on November so that they have the financial capacity to jump in on recovery navigation in the event when the next disaster happens sooner in the process. And so they haven't reimbursed us, but they matched us. It's truly a partnership.
Okay, thank you. So first question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Katie with Philanthropy California, Northern California Grantmakers. I'm filling in for my boss, Alan, who some of you know, he's on sabbatical right now. So congratulations to him. I'm trying to channel him and what he would ask. And I think he would say, what are maybe 2 or 3 things funders need to know and how they can best support your work before a disaster and immediately after and in the long term? So maybe one thing funders should know from each of those. Thank you.
Megan, do you want to take that one? You look like you're game. If you can get that to work.
The importance of infrastructure. I mean, the best gift I got was like Genetech, who, if you are from the Bay Area, you may know, calling and saying, we have money, what do you need? And thank God understood the value of case management. That was huge. Because the other lesson, there are many lessons, one of which is, as I say, the big guys do not show up right away. Yes, you might eventually get Catholic Charities or you might eventually get FEMA, but you don't have them right away. So those kind of funders that could be flexible and understood the value of positions, that just staffing is critical. Like she was just talking about that, we had one of those too, and John was huge in that as well. But we had to pay John, right? So, there's that whole thing. So I would say super important to to recognize, and I hadn't shared because I didn't know how much to talk about, but I hit this fire with 2.5 FTEs, myself being one of the 2.5. Yeah. So thank God I'm a project manager by training, and I thought, how am I going to project manage this? Which thankfully I had the thought, because you're so overwhelmed that when somebody called, I said, you know, I need a project manager who's going to run the long-term recovery effort, because, you know, I could chair it, but I couldn't run it on top of raising money, on top of taking phone calls when people are asking you, thinking of my friend here, we've got a shipment of bras, would you like them? Last thing I know is how many women and what the bra size is, right? So you're getting crazy calls. How about the ballet? I mean, I love San Francisco Ballet, Nutcracker, but they're asking me if people want tickets to the ballet, which is, you know, 2 hours away, and you need a pretty dress. And how many of our children had parents who could buy them the pretty dress and drive them 4 hours round trip to go to the ballet? You get these crazy calls. So you're trying to manage all that. So yeah, from a funder's perspective, please come in and give us staffing. The other thing I would say is one of the things I did, again, kind of instinctually, was to build, my fund was really disaster oriented. It was very focused on helping individuals. So, and we did make the error of not charging fees, which was also kind of challenging. So I had to find people who would even just cover our fees, which are very minimal, 1.5%. So, but the other thing is I needed some hope, and I kept thinking about what happens. Now, I got lucky in that it was somewhat in the city area. So when Cal Fire and their buddies showed up and created a little tent city, which I didn't know about until it happened to me, we had enough infrastructure. But I have parts of our county where we couldn't handle that infrastructure. We don't have sewers, guys. Just so you know, we do not have sewer systems. So you can't put one of those big tent cities there. So I kept thinking, I have to be thoughtful about how I'd handle this in the future. So we did do a preparedness and resiliency fund. And I would ask you now, if anybody here wants to help us out, please help us by funding preparedness. We have almost all of our fire departments, with the exception of a couple, are all volunteer-led entities. So that means that if there's a fire in one of these slightly more remote areas, and for any of you that are more city-oriented would not even believe what that means, you've got, you know, people who, the only people that are going to respond are the people who live there, who are, you know, have another job. So, but just making sure our fire departments have what they need is really important. So that would be my other one, is help us prepare for the next one, because as we all know, there is a next one.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. A question for the funders. Reporting is just so crucial to your donor relations, funder relations. It's huge for philanthropy, right? And for a lot of funders. I'm with the state of Oregon. You are all amazingly responsive. I'm taking notes here on everything you've done. Could you please share some best practices in how you met communities and groups where they were as they recovered, and how you flexed or adapted metrics and reporting so you still got what you needed, right, to keep going, to keep doing more, but you met them where they were? Thank you.
I'll take it.
Gabriela, you look like you want to.
Sure. So I have this unique role where I am embedded in the community with the partnership, and then I also work with our grants manager, Samantha, Director of Special Initiatives, what LCF has done in community is the reporting that we ask, we know they're busy, we tell them 2 pages max. 2 pages max, and we translate it as well for our Just Recovery partnership, because we have, so we meet them, they asked for that, and we met them where they're at. Samantha doesn't read or speak Spanish, but she has me, and I support her with that. And that goes a long way, because our partners see that we're listening to them, and I don't know how, I honestly don't know. I'm not questioning. I just don't know how many other funders do that. Because we're in deep relationship with the partners, we don't have to be asking them for these metrics, because we hear it from them, and Samantha's amazing at taking what she hears. She truly listens, and you'll read that in the report. Like, it's a simple recommendation, but listen and trust your community organizations. And she's amazing at then amplifying. We amplify the stories and the realities that's on the ground, so that we take that job from them and they can focus on doing the good work.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thanks, Gabriela.
Hi, I'm Elib Chris Dwyer. I work for Rogue Action Center in Southern Oregon, supporting survivors. And my question isn't just for the panel, but I think the room in general. Here in Sonoma County and in Boulder, you all are very well resourced with organizations like Genentech who can step in with these philanthropic opportunities, but we're in an area that's very small without a lot of that infrastructure. And you know, I'm watching the great contributions that organizations have made in these neighborhoods and areas, but are there any suggestions anyone has to funding sources like you're talking about that aren't so regionally specific that might be able to step into some of these communities that aren't as well resourced?
Yes.
Happy to have any of the panelists take that, but I'm going to take a shot at it to start with. I don't know if you happen to know, but over the pandemic in 2020, the Gates Foundation added a fourth sort of pillar of climate change. And if anything is going on in the west of America right now, we've got some serious issues with heat and drought and fires. And so I think I would just challenge this whole group to really think about, maybe it's time for a cadre of you all to go up to Seattle, get a meeting, because they're the kind of organization that can throw $500 million at something and just say, why don't we build a different kind of infrastructure? Because the infrastructure that we have is currently not working. It's being cobbled together through all these community-based organizations, foundations, groups such as yourselves, working with small municipalities. In some cases, you know, we've got colleagues here from Blue River, which I happen to know of in Oregon. You know, they're not even incorporated, right? These are tiny little groups, and they're running right into the fray. But that capturing of the initial resources is important, and there has to be infrastructure built to help that actually happen. Tatiana, you talked earlier about how you had managed to do that because you literally were giving an hour-by-hour account of how quickly you were talking with your OEM in your county, and that's through a direct relationship you already had. Gabriela, you were mentioning the promotoras and, you know, that relationship that's very deep and you've already built, so it was already there. So how do we leverage the resources broadly to bring it to bear? I've been holding this back because I don't want to end the day on a downer, but I found out yesterday, I'm going to do it. Oh, you should shut me up?
Wait,
okay.
Jim, can I?
Well, it's this. So I found out yesterday from a colleague in Washington, D.C., that FEMA has $8.7 billion with a B that will turn into a pumpkin on September 30th because it wasn't taken. Now, the appropriations that cause that money to be created includes some of the money going back to coronavirus, but I have confirmed that some of that money is also from other disasters. And what happens is that money just goes back up into the kitty, back up into the treasury if that appropriation wasn't met or it wasn't extended. And the chances of it being extended between now and September 30th is pretty low. So I really would encourage you all, with our philanthropic colleagues, to mobilize to advocate for the needs of our communities with the government. We've got to break down some of the systems that are causing people to be blocked from the resources that they need, and nonprofits and community foundations and groups having to jump in and play the role of government. You know, again, Tatiana, I think you should present somebody a bill for you know, creating their case management system for them. So I'm going to get off my high horse.
Jim, can I actually?
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
didn't catch your name. What was your name with that question? Elib?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I offer also a challenge. We raised $40 million from nearly 80,000 people. And I think more than it being a resourced community, because yes, we are a affluent community, the generosity that we experienced was in small, like $50, $25, $100 increments. And I actually credit that to the fact that we had a relationship with our Office of Emergency Management, who were the focus in the first day of the fire, and we were on their website as the place to give donations to. So everybody just oriented to us. And that's, I mean, we turned like solar panels, like, yes, please, we know this is bad. Like, we need to capture this moment. But I think speed and relationship, to Jim's point, like the speed that we were able to say, this is bad, we need to do something, and getting on the place where everyone's looking to support in whatever way they felt, I think that was more the reason for why we received the kind of support we did versus like the number of 7-figure gifts that we got is like a handful. Not insignificant, but it wasn't like every company in town dropped 7 figures on us. That's not what happened. It was every restaurant putting up a QR code in their window for a month.
So I'm going to end it with one last question. And this is something I'm drawing a little bit from my international relief and development experience, is that having us all start to agree to some kind of parameters on what disaster survivors should humanely expect from those organizations and funders and governments is, I think, a huge part of what we should be advocating for. Right now, there is no standard of humanitarian care for wildfire survivors, either across states or certainly across America. So, and Jake and I were talking earlier about, creating standards of making sure, and his organization doesn't do this, but there are organizations that do. They'll drop drugs in a community that are already expired, right? Or how many of you, raise your hand if you've sorted through piles of left shoes only, right? That is just so unhelpful in any kind of a disaster. Obviously, what people need most is resource and support. It's human emotional support, and it's cash as quickly and as effectively as they can get it, with as little barrier as we can possibly create. So there are opportunities we live in a digital age. I'm already checked in on my flight out of here later this evening. Like, seriously, a wildfire survivor can't be checked in through an app to answer one series of questions one time, and then forevermore they can use that as their ability to attain resources. That's, I think, the future of philanthropy, and it's the future of how we all can engage with these organizations, with each other, with the government, and help these people in a more effective way. So I really appreciate this panel. You look like you're going to just say something again, Tatiana.
I can't help it. I can't help it.
I'm going to let you have the last word. I'm going to let each of you say one last thing that you want. One last short thing.
Oh, okay, Jennifer.
Short.
I think I like that you said reasonable, because I think the field of philanthropy can be slow. That doesn't mean we can't move quickly, but it can be slow. And so I think I would challenge foundations to the extent to which they can prepare to be more responsive, prepare to move more quickly. That would be ideal. But I would also ask fire survivors to have patience. I'm not saying back down. I'm not saying don't ask for what your needs are, but also to recognize that philanthropy is trying to look at the entire picture, right? Not just what's right in front of us, but looking at things from the holistic perspective. And so it's a tension to hold.
Yeah, thanks. Megan, you don't want to say a last word? No? You're going to pass? Jake?
Yeah, I feel like I've said what I need to say.
You did. Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. So I think in terms of disaster, we can probably all agree. I think public education about a lot of the concepts we deal with is so crucial. I don't think the average person is aware of the spatial area or the duration of recovery following a disaster. So just as a reference, I think yesterday someone was referring to a fire in their community that was 400,000 acres and 800 square miles. Just as a reference, I'm from Delaware. That's like a third of the state. Yeah. So when I was telling I was talking to my parents last night about that, they had no idea, like, why wasn't that in the news? And it was like, it was, I'm sure at the time, maybe for a week. And that recovery, I'm sure, is still going on, just like all of the others. And when I'm talking about, what we're doing at work, and I say we're helping people from Hurricane Ida, for example, and they're saying, that was a year ago. What do you mean? Like, what are you doing? And yeah, it's going to take a while, and we'll be helping them next year and probably the year after that. It takes a long time. I think the average person really does not grasp that length of time or that space that it takes up.
Gabriela, you get the last word.
All right, so with my funder hat, I'll just say unrestricted funds and trust the organizations from the get-go. And then with my on-the-ground, been in the shelters, standard for wildfire victims, disaster victims, period, would be take Social Security number questions off of forms, because like we heard Senator Dodd earlier, disasters, wildfires don't discriminate. They don't care who you are, and neither should our recovery and efforts.
No, agreed, absolutely. Thank you again to this amazing panel and the work that they're doing in these communities. If you join in giving them one round of applause. Thank you. And thank you to Jennifer and Pam and the After the Fire team for putting this amazing summit on.
And side note, it was Jim who actually asked us to do this. So big round of applause for Jim. It's true, but thank you though.